In the heart of the Middle Ages, there exist 2 centuries dominated by one of the most violent crowds history has ever known. Brutal men, bound by blood and steel, roamed the seas not as explorers, but as raiders. The ones known as the Norse Vikings, a people who reveled in war, glorified slaughter, and built their legends atop the corpses of the innocent. They raised villages for pastime, sold their fellow man for flasks of ale, all while calling their actions honorable. Feared for their unrelenting violence and praised for their warrior code, the Vikings left behind a legacy soaked in blood. But what they called strength was just savagery at the highest level. For despite their pride, most were not true warriors. There is a difference, a deep moral divide between a killer and a warrior. Few understood this. But one of the few who did was their strongest, Thor's the Troll, a leader amongst men. One who walked away from war at the height of his power, for he saw through the illusion of glory, through the lies of kings and clans. He came to believe that a true warrior does not seek battle, but protects life. Yet even he, with all his strength and wisdom, knew he could not change the world that had fallen under Danish rule. The violence was too deeply woven into the fabric of their culture, and so he had made a choice, not to conquer, but to escape. With his wife and newborn child, Thor's journeyed westward in search of peace, not for a land to seize, but a place to lead a quiet life. A place where he was free from the world of pain and suffering he for too long contributed to. Thor's dreamed of a land beyond the reach of kings and killers, a place untouched by slavery and war, a land of open skies, fertile soil, and above all, hope. A hope that a land such as this could exist. A place they might one day call home. That land was Vinland, yet for now, they find sanctuary in Iceland, a harsh but peaceful land, far removed from the chaos of the world they left behind. So begins the story of Vinland Saga, a tale not just of violence and vengeance, but of transformation, of what it means to reject the blade when all you've known is blood, of what it means to truly be free from all that chains a man. This is the message of Vinland Saga. It's a cold, harsh climate, not exactly free from violence and slavery as Thor's would hope. Though distant from the blood-soaked fields of Europe, even here, violence lingers in the margins. Skirmishes still erupt. Slave ships still arrive. The shadow of war has not yet been banished, only dimmed. However, within this quiet corner of the island, Thor's has carved out something rare. A fragile peace. His village, small and remote, spared much of the cruelty that lies beyond its borders, thanks to his presence. The mere memory of his past strength wards off would-be threats. But Thor's does not revel in this power. He uses it to protect. He tries in quiet ways to pass that mindset down to the next generation. To his daughter Ylva, he speaks against slavery, even as she complains of needing help around the farm. To his son, just 6 years old, he speaks against war, hoping to extinguish the sparks of bloodlust before they catch flame. But it isn't easy. The boy, like many other in the village, is drawn to tales of battle. He idolizes warriors, hears songs of glory at the screams of their victims. Raised in a time of relative peace, these children, these future fighters, romanticize war because they have never truly seen it. They do not know the weight of a sword swung with intention. They do not understand that to take a life is to lose a part of your own. Honor, glory, strength, these are the values they inherit. But death, suffering, and regret, those are lessons they have yet to learn. Thorfinn, son of Thor's, has 2 paths laid out before him that he does not see with his own eyes. One of such is seen in his father's past mistakes, the things he regrets, in the pile of corpses that haunt his dreams. The other is seen in the beauty of his father's current existence, in the life of the Voyager Leaf, a positive figure in the boy's life, cultivating interest not in killing outgroups and destroying lands, but journeying to them and understanding the people and their cultures. But it's hard not to stray from what we see as the better path, when all around you are people brought into the Norse way of thinking, a way of thought built on protecting a so-called warrior's honor, and instilling a legacy they believe will not be forgotten. A worldview where dying in battle is not a tragedy, but a triumph. To live quietly is to be forgotten. To die with a sword in hand is to be remembered. Even in these isolated villagers of Iceland, far removed from the great raids and conquests of their fellow Norsemen. This mindset endured. They still romanticize battle as a rite of passage, a path to meaning in a harsh and indifferent world. Yet their distance from real bloodshed created an illusion. They praised the glory of battle without knowing its cost. In seeking war, they chased stories. In avoiding it, they preserved their ignorance. It is this tension between inherited ideals and lived reality that defines the quiet storm that begins to root itself in this saga. Among the few cruelties of Icelandic life, the first to break our bubble of comfort and peace in this land is the fleeing slave, setting out on foot in the harsh climate. Death more attractive than another day under the slave driver Halfdan's foot. His body is coated in frostbite, his life nearly depleted. Yet Thors gives this man, who by all means has no hope of living, medicine, warmth, and food. He does everything in his power to pull him through, yet the man is too beaten and broken by society, dehumanized by a system he cannot escape. When Halfdan appears at Thor's door, attempting to take back his dying property, the man stands up, not to use violence against this slave master who clearly deserves to be knocked down a few pegs. Rather, he takes the path of diplomacy. His opposition to Halfdan's way of life is the pressure he puts on the man by purchasing this dying slave for 8 of his sheep, a price well over what would be considered reasonable. Halfdan had hoped to get a rise out of Thors for asking so much, but instead he's faced with a man who wholeheartedly accepts that this world is tarnished with inequality and injustice. Rather than whine, he does what little he can to not contribute to its ugliness. His presence is enough to make Halfdan sick, more so of himself, because in this man's presence, it's painfully obvious how cruel and unlovable he is. He leaves with the sheep, admitting loss only to himself, not taking one look back. The slave inevitably dies, but he dies a free man thanks to Thor's compassion, not one whose body would be paraded by Halfdan to instill fear into the other slaves of escape. Ylva may not understand her father's methods, yet this small, quiet act stands in defiance of everything the Norse culture teaches. There's hope this compassion may spread. In a world where strength defines worth, Thors reminds us that the truest of strengths is in understanding and caring for your fellow man. In a society that equates manhood with domination, he chooses to spread mercy. And in a land where slavery is accepted as tradition, he resists, not with grand speeches, but with simple, stubborn decency. But that same decency may not be enough to deter the village's second challenge, the Vikings. Former brothers in arms for Thors, how they found him we are unsure, but yet here we are. Given their size and numbers, the one known as Floki has not come for simple pleasantries with a comrade once thought to have died in battle. He tells Thors of the Danish king Sweyn's plan to seize England. The noble has called back one of his finest warriors to battle, and as a Viking, even if Thors believes that to be his former title, he is sworn by an oath to the king to return to the field. Knowing this is not an ask, but an order, Thors agrees to the condition, and is forced to bring the ignorant village's young men with him to battle. He does not desire for these boys to learn the horrors of war, but the decision was made without him. If he was to retaliate, the dozens of highly trained marauders would pillage this innocent village and kill its weak. However, Floki's message of a call to arms for Thor's village never was about the invasion of England that was soon to take place. No, that was a simple excuse to have the man killed on his journey through the North Sea. Floki had despised Thors for what he stood for, a Viking who deserted the battlefield instead of dying amongst the carnage, the gravest offense to their code. But he didn't just leave the Viking life, he thrived outside it. Thors became a challenge to their culture of war, a symbol that strength can exist outside of cruelty. He and his tribe of warriors are not only inferior in strength to this former warrior, but also in spirit, and for that he cannot allow him to live. But due to the king's order for Floki to bring Thors back, he himself cannot be the one to kill him, so he employs the swords of another Viking tribe, a crew under the command of the master trickster Ashkelot. They take this contract killing for a good amount of coin, and set out to kill the man renowned by legend as Thors the Troll. With the talk of the town surrounding the impending voyage out to kill the English and seize their land, Thorfinn, age 6, believes that he too should be allowed to journey by his father's side to the English frontier. He becomes angry with his father and with Leif, who reject his pleas, and so now the boy finds himself standing in front of his father's chest, pulling from it the dagger that once was covered with the blood of innocents and warriors alike. When Thorfinn lifts his father's blade, it's more than a child mimicking a hero. It's the beginning of a legacy he doesn't yet understand. Thor kneels before his son and poses the question that will define the boy's journey for the next several decades. When asked why he would need such a weapon, Thorfinn answers to kill enemies like Halfdan. But his father responds, "You don't have any enemies. No one has enemies. There is no one you should hurt." It's a moment heavy with sorrow, not just because Thor fears the path his son will walk if he is not there to challenge the Norse code, but because he also knows how fragile peace is in a world ruled by violence. The sword in Thorfinn's hand is both a tool and a curse, and Thor's, who once lived by it, now tries to shield his son from the same fate. This exchange is at the heart of this story, a question of identity, morality, and legacy. In a culture that worships strength, Thor plants a seed of restraint. Whether that seed takes root becomes the tragedy and the hope of Thorfinn's journey. A tug of war within the boy's heart that becomes challenged when he witnesses his father die. Having stowed away on the ship set to sail to England, watching as his father made the choice to not vanquish his foes, but incapacitate them. Realizing they had no hope of besting him, Ashkelad makes a promise on his mother's grave to Thor's that if he agrees to die, they will let the terrified villagers return home. Thor's chooses this path, knowing it will grant his son safety, and dies not in glorious battle, but in sacrifice amongst the caverns of an unnamed island, giving his life to protect his son and spare his fellow man. In a world that rewards cruelty and punishes mercy, his death feels like a bitter confirmation. Compassion cannot survive here. The strong devour the gentle, and honor is a lie sold by killers. Yet in that final moment, Thor does something greater than win a fight. He keeps his soul intact. He refuses to kill, even when surrounded by killers. He chooses peace, even as it costs him his life. To those watching, his death is tragic, but to those who understand, it is extremely profound. Thor's life is a message buried behind the blood spilled through this saga. That true strength lies not in taking life, but in protecting it. He dies with no sword in hand, but leaves behind a greater weapon than steel could forge. An idea that his son, lost, broken, and furious, will one day learn to carry. The man dies, but the mantle remains, and that is where hope can begin. Hope lost behind the flames of hatred that now consume his son. Thorfinn had deserted the ship that set sail for home, stowed away on the one the Vikings under Ashkelad took as reward for their shallow victory. In awe of Thor's strength and his principles, having incapacitated nearly their entire crew, but not killing one, they decide to let his child live. Only the boy begins following them on their voyages. Starving and fueled by rage, he learns to live off the land and wield a knife against those he calls his enemies, the one his father had told him to never use against another, one he now sees as his tool to avenge his fallen father. After attempting to kill Ashkelad twice, the Vikings decide to allow the boy to stick around like a pet. He's quiet, obedient, and burning with a hatred they recognize, a seed they know how to water. In their eyes, he's already halfway to becoming one of them. A child with no guidance and a thirst for vengeance is easy to mold. They don't see a boy lost in a sea of trauma. They see a blade waiting to be sharpened. A decision to take him in, so small in the moment, marks the beginning of Thorfinn's transformation. It shows how in this world, the line between child and soldier vanishes the moment innocence is lost, and how a culture rooted in violence sees anger not as a wound, but as potential. Thorfinn's descent is tragic. The boy who once clung to his father's words becomes the very thing Thor's feared most. Consumed by vengeance, he sharpens the blade his father tried to bury, chasing death with hollow eyes. Where Thor's taught that a true warrior needs no sword, Thorfinn answers with a remorseless mind and spilled blood. In his clouded state of vengeance, he simply forgets about them. His innocence died on that boat, and in its place grew a soldier shaped by hate. And that is the saddest part, not that Thorfinn failed to live up to his father's teachings, but that he was too young to understand them before the world crushed his humanity. Thor's dreamed of peace, yet his son became a weapon of war. In the ruins of that dream lies the cost of a world where mercy is weakness, and war raises children. And in the void of a male figure for Thorfinn to look to for guidance, Askeladd replaces Thor's. The pair's relationship is complex. It's something far more twisted, layered, and tragic than we would expect on the surface. Askeladd is the man who murdered Thorfinn's father, yet becomes the closest thing Thorfinn has to a father. Thorfinn in turn hates him with a burning obsession, yet relies on him for purpose, identity, and survival. The relationship is forged in contradiction. Askeladd dangles the promise of revenge like a leash, but also subtly shapes the boy beneath the rage into a stronger warrior more capable of surviving amongst the vile Norse. He mocks Thorfinn's weakness, yet protects him from harm. He exploits his anger, yet seems to pity his circumstances. In truth, Askeladd sees in Thorfinn both a weapon and a mirror, a boy devoured by the same cycle of violence he's learned to manipulate. For his past is just as tragic. Only Askeladd never had a man like Thor's to look towards for direction. And Thorfinn, though he refuses to admit it, seeks more than vengeance from the man he follows. He seeks meaning, validation, and perhaps unknowingly, a missing father figure. Their relationship is an expression of emotional repression, power dynamics, and the cost of living without purpose beyond hatred. It is not love that brought them together, nor is it a mentorship, but in this broken world, it is the only connection either of them truly has. They are bound together by fate and admiration.
人間はみんな何かの奴隷だ。
In this quote lies the heart of this character we at first loathe for the murder of Thor's. But over time, as we begin to know him, just like Thorfinn, our relationship with his character becomes muddied and strange. On the surface, Askeladd is speaking about control, the idea that no one is truly free. Whether it's a literal chain, like the ones binding physical slaves, or an internal one, like ambition, ideology, revenge, fear, or loyalty. Everyone is bound by something. No one escapes servitude. The difference lies in what masters us. He's cracking open the illusion of agency. Even the most powerful men, kings, generals, warriors, are often driven by forces they don't question. Thorfinn is a slave to revenge. The Vikings are slaves to their hunger for glory, and the Christian monks they've become familiar with are slaves to their god. Askeladd himself is a slave to loyalty, for land he dreams of saving, a secret only the few know of. This perspective strips away moral hierarchy. The man is unjudging of the nature of what enslaves someone, only noting the fact it does. It's a cynical but deeply insightful worldview. It portrays Askeladd as a determinist, someone who believes humans are not truly free agents, but products of conditioning, culture, trauma, and survival instincts. His philosophy also echoes a deeply Machiavellian principle. People are governed more by their needs and desires than by virtue. Even acts of nobility are often rooted in fear, guilt, or social expectation. Askeladd sees true freedom as a concept for the privileged. Most people are just chasing something they didn't choose to want, coping by calling themselves liberated. When Askeladd says this, it isn't just a comment on the inner workings of others. It's a condemnation of himself. It's a rare moment of self-awareness. Despite all his manipulation and control, he's just as bound to his bloodline, to his mother's dream, to his hatred of the Danes, the same people he walks amongst, and to his carefully curated identity. He walks among these warriors he hates as a half-Dane. His mother, a slave from Wales, taken as a trophy by his father for his contributions in battle. He grew up caring for his mother, the two cast aside to live in stables. His father, Olaf, not wanting to care for an immigrant slave pregnant with his child. His mother was particularly frail due to malnutrition and illness, so the boy took to the blacksmith to earn money for food, gaining his nickname, Askeladd, one who walks in ash, for the dust that would coat his feet. The boy despised his father, hated seeing the man parade around the village in luxury, but it wasn't until his sick mother in a fevered state tried to call out to her lover that he first presented himself to his pops. As Olaf attempted to cut down his mother, he jumped in, as if naturally, striking back with such skill. Olaf immediately recognized the boy's innate ability was akin to his own. A curse, as Ashkelad describes, he must have got from his father's blood. He's taken in like one of Olaf's legitimate sons, and for years he stifles his hatred, learning the way of the blade, the ways of war, until one day, he kills his father while he beds with one of his mistresses. He would soon remark to Thorfinn that this is why the boy is unable to best him. The perfect warrior in Ashkelad's mind is not the strongest or the fastest, but the one who remains composed even in the face of death. In that calm lies clarity, control, and true strength. It's a lesson he offers to Thorfinn not just as advice, but as a mirror to his greatest flaw, emotional validity, where Thorfinn fights with rage and impulse in their duels against one another. Ashkelad maneuvers with patience and precision, for unlike Thorfinn, he does not hate his opponent. This philosophy echoes the Stoic ideas of restraint and mastery over the self, because in war, as in life, those who lose themselves to emotion become tools for others to use. The composed warrior, however, cannot be moved by a fleeting feeling, only moved by purpose. That is what separates the Thorfinn of service from the Thorfinn within duels. He normally approaches battle cold and emotionless, compartmentalizing everything, able to do so as he's moved to win an opportunity to kill Ashkelad in a duel. But the floodgates open in each fight he has with his father's killer, leaving him vulnerable to rage bait within them, but also outside of these confrontations as well. Ashkelad can use Thorfinn, and Thorfinn will accept doing his bidding, as long as he's promised a mere opportunity to kill him. Yet each time he fails miserably, so why doesn't he take the obvious bone Ashkelad dances before him, that he should kill him in his sleep? Thorfinn has had countless chances to do so over years, and yet never does. Not because he lacks the skill, but because deep down, he doesn't want revenge handed to him. He wants to earn it. To defeat Ashkelad in a fair duel is, in Thorfinn's mind, the only way to restore his father's honor, and in a fucked up way, prove to the man who's nurtured him in war that he is better than the one who walks amongst ashes. Viking culture took root in his mindset before he even realized it. But more than that, he's become trapped in the ritual, the cycle of challenge and defeat, because it gives his life structure, even if that structure is built on hatred. It allows him to avoid the trauma building within his subconscious, his moral compass attempting to scream out to him to stop all this killing, only it cannot reach a boy swallowed by rage. Ashkelad, ever perceptive, understands this, and so he taunts Thorfinn, knowing the boy is too blinded by emotion to ever land a fatal blow in a real fight. Thorfinn's rage makes him predictable, raw, explosive, and ultimately incomplete. Killing Ashkelad in his sleep would be the most logical way to rid yourself of your source of revenge, but it would also be meaningless to Thorfinn. He doesn't want Ashkelad dead. He wants him to acknowledge him and acknowledge his father's strength. And so the blade stays sheathed at night, because what Thorfinn truly craves isn't justice, it's validation. His target becomes a mirror for him, though the boy doesn't realize until much later that he's been a slave to pride and honor, one inherited from the very world Thor's tried to protect him from. Those who pick up the sword will die by the sword. These words, spoken by Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, reject violence even in self-defense, a principle that echoes across Vinland Saga through the quiet strength of Thor's and the painful journey of his son. It's a truth that transcends religion. The cycle of violence consumes all who embrace it, stripping them not just of life, but of their soul. This quote appears in the hands of Prince Canute, long before his transformation into a hardened ruler. Sitting with the priest and his surrogate father figure Ragnar, Canute reads the verse out loud, not yet understanding its weight. At this stage, he is gentle, passive, and paralyzed by the cruelty of the world, embodying the opposite of Viking ideals despite being the prince of their king. The quote reflects a conflict inside him, a yearning for peace in a world that worships the sword. Yet the irony is clear. Both Canute and Thorfinn eventually pick up the sword, each for their own reasons, and both suffer the moral cost of its double-edged nature. But in this small moment, the quote serves as a window into a world without conquest. A world that Thor's dreamed of, that Canute still believes in, and that Vinland itself represents. It's a crossroads, and at this moment, Canute hasn't chosen his path yet, but the sword is calling. The Viking world is one of blood and steel, a culture that celebrates death over life, domination over empathy. In this value system, battle is worshipped, morality is mocked, and the highest purpose is to fulfill one's desire through strength and conquest. Mercy has no place, Peace is for the weak, and meaning is forged through the death of those that disagree. It is a world where to live without enemies is not just naive, it is dangerous. But Thor's dared to reject this legacy. His quiet rebellion lies in a single phrase that still finds itself ingrained in Thorfinn, though at this moment, he struggles to grasp it. You have no enemies. To Thor's, the enemy was not a person, but the hatred that corrupts men's hearts. It's a radical belief that true strength lies in restraint, and a warrior's purpose is to protect, not destroy. It left Thorkill the Tall, a man Thorfinn has dueled once by this time, frustrated and confused. He saw his friend off the night he left the Yom Vikings village, attempting to stop him, but unable to, even though Thor's was unarmed. He recounts his eyes that told a story as if his body was here, that his true being was somewhere beyond Thorkill's reach, beyond the blood-spilled fields of corpses and decay. Something changed within the fiercest warrior among the Yorm's Vikings, something no sword could ever touch. His eyes, once filled with the fire of war, had gone still, like calm water after a storm. In them Thorkill saw not cowardice, but a man who had broken free from the chains of glory, pride, and death. Thor no longer needed the battlefield to define him. He had found something far greater: peace, family, and purpose without violence. And that frightened Thorkill, as, like Floki, it was an alternate path to the ones they walked. In a world where men live and die for the sword, to reject it is to hold up a mirror and force others to question the path they've never dared to stray from. For Canute, the ideal of no enemies once resonated, a boy sheltered by faith, clinging to gentleness and morality in a world that rewards brutality. But the blood in his veins betrays him. He is royalty, and that means his life is not his own. He cannot stay passive. He cannot remain innocent. The throne demands action, and in the Viking world, action means blood. Just as Thorfinn was consumed by vengeance, Canute is forced to confront the cost of peace in a world that does not value it. The philosophy of no enemies may offer hope, but it is a hope that must fight to exist in a world ruled by the sword. A hope, however small though, remains lurking within the bloody Norse culture. In one of the rare pauses between bloodshed and pillaging, the Vikings sat around a fire and asked the Christian priests a question they could not answer themselves. What is love? These are men born into a world where affection is thought to mean weakness, and loyalty is earned through shows of strength. They understand desire, lust, and brotherhood in battle, but love, true love, is alien to them. The priest struggles to explain in words they'll understand, because love in the Christian sense, unconditional, self-sacrificing, forgiving, is completely foreign to their worldview. In the Viking code, to love is to possess, to conquer, protect only what is yours. But the priest speaks of a love that gives without expecting, that values life over pride, that even forgives enemies. It's a deeply philosophical moment, a crack in the Viking armor. For the first time, they're confronted with an idea that challenges everything they believe, that true strength might not come from the sword, but from the ability to love without condition. It's the same truth Thor's tried to embody, and though they scoff or laugh at the priest's words, the seed of doubts is planted that some latch onto, while others turn away from. Canute's crisis begins from the love he holds for Ragnar, that transforms him from the peace-desiring boy unfit to rule. The change doesn't begin with a sword, but with the death of a man who taught him to be gentle and kind, in an existential question, a question about God, love, and the meaning of suffering. Sitting beside the Christian priest, rattled by the death of Ragnar and the chaos around him, Canute stares into the void of belief. Raised in a faith that speaks of divine love and justice, he sees none of that in this world around him. What is there besides cruelty and betrayal? If God is to love us, then where is he as we slaughter one another? The question isn't rhetorical. It's a cry from a soul unraveling. For so long, Canute lived passively, believing goodness would prevail through faith. But now, faith feels hollow. God seems silent. And in that silence, something inside him shatters. It's more than a loss of religion. It's the death of the person he used to be. A boy shielded by others, living in fear, hoping the world might be kind. In its place, something new begins to stir. A cold clarity. A realization that if justice and love will not descend from the heavens, then he must bring them down himself. This is the moment Canute stops waiting for peace and starts preparing to create it, even if it must be forged through abuse of power. It is the beginning of his transformation into a man of will. The boy who once whispered prayers now speaks with the voice of a king. But Canut's new ideology is not one born of divine revelation. It is forged from disillusionment, grief, and cold logic. Where once he waited for God to come from the heavens and bring order to the world, he now declares, "If God will not create paradise, then I will." Canute no longer sees divine love as salvation. He sees it as a myth used to cope with the world he now faces. To him, God is either absent or indifferent to their suffering, and if humanity is to know peace, it must be through the hand of man, through structure, through power, through rule. His vision is a paradise on earth, but it requires control, sacrifice, and ruthlessness to become accepted. So he accepts death as a necessary toll to create this world. He believes the ends can justify the means, so long as those means lead to peace. It is a striking contrast to Thor's idealism, where the stoic man believed in moral absolutes, that true strength comes from compassion. Canute embraces a Machiavellian truth, that to protect peace, one must sometimes become the very force that threatens it. He does not reject love and compassion at its roots. He simply redefines it as order enforced through strength, the one thing the Norse will accept. It's a king's burden, a man's will. His new self draws others to his side. Ashkelad sees a boy prepared to seize his right to power under monarchy, having believed Ragnar was the force that held the boy back from becoming a man that accepted the world as it is. He too, someone who views the world under a cynic lens. Canute is noted to have similar eyes to that of Thor's the day Thorkill watched him leave. But while they have similarities, there's a difference in the resolve behind their gaze. Thor's eyes reflected a man who walked away from power, who renounced the sword and chose peace at all costs. Canute's, by contrast, reflects a man who has embraced power, not for glory, but to impose peace by force. Both pairs of eyes carry resolve, but Thor's was rooted in humility, Canute's in authority. One looked inward and saw the futility of violence, the other looked outward and saw the necessity to control it. To Thorkill, who strives on strength and clarity, that gaze is sacred. It's a mark of someone who has seen through the lies of the world and found their own path. In both Thor's and Canute, he sees leaders, not per se because they're the strongest fighters, but because they've reached a conviction most men fear to face. Canute's eyes mirror Thor's in depth and fearlessness, but the fire behind them burns for a different cause, peace through dominion. Canute's ambition unites both Thorkill's mercenaries and Ashkelad's remaining forces under a common cause, giving meaning to their cravings of violence, purpose to their nature. It's a complex leadership that holds more impact than Ashkelad's manipulation of his forces despite his hate for them. Canute, shaped by faith and heartbreak, sees the Vikings as lost men, consumed by violence, driven by pride, and desperate for purpose. He detests their cruelty, but believes they can be ruled, tamed, and perhaps even redeemed. To him, their brutality is a disease, and he, as king, must be the cure. Ashkelad, however, has no such hope. To him, the Vikings are brutes, useful, predictable, and disposable. He understands them too well to pity them. They are tools, weapons with egos to manipulate with a master's hand. He wears the mask of a Viking only to survive, and to steer events towards his true goal, protecting the last remnant of his mother's people, the Welsh. Ashkelad and Canute are two sides of a blade, each sharp where the other is lacking. Canute provides Ashkelad with legitimacy and a path to a future worth fighting for. He's the political vessel, the royal bloodline that can change the world, the only road by which Ashkelad's dream of protecting Wales can be realized. Without Canute, Ashkelad's cleverness has no lasting impact, just survival. Ashkelad, in turn, becomes the crucible in which Canute is reforged. He strips away the boy's illusions by killing his surrogate father, exposing him to the brutal truths of the world, and forcing the boy to confront his own powerlessness. Without Ashkelad's cruelty and cunning guidance, Canute would have remained in the shadow of others, too afraid to act. They use each other, but not without respect. Canute learns to rule from a man who despises rulers. Ashkelad entrusts his dream to a boy who once knew nothing of war. Together they are proof that sometimes revolution is born, not from friendship, but from necessity. Their shared contempt for the state of things binds them, but it is how they act on it that defines their legacy. In the defining moment of Ashkelad's legend, a approaches. Before the defining moment of the Welshman's legacy, 2 duels take place. The first against his longtime follower Bjorn, a Viking wounded from their skirmish against Thorkel, bound to die, but not wishing for it to be while bedridden. As the Viking's path to Valhalla requires, he must die in battle, and so Ashkelad grants that request, not as a friend, but as something else. It's the first and only time he shows Bjorn true kindness, by honoring the values he spent so long mocking. In Bjorn's brutal, lonely world, Ashkelad is the only one he respects, perhaps even loves, in a brotherly, almost childlike way. In this duel, if you can even call it that, Ashkelad grants his only companion the dignity he sought in life, and silently mourns the human cost of the world they were born into. It's a moment that lays bare the tragedy of Ashkelad's existence. For all his intelligence and ambition, he is utterly alone in his quest, and Bjorn, even in death, was the closest thing he had to a friend, without having anyone to truly call by that title. And then there is the boy, not his son, but at times it truly feels that way. Their final duel is the painful eruption of the relationship that has always mirrored a twisted father-son dynamic. One built on resentment, dependency, and unspoken recognition. From the moment Thor's died, Ashkelad became the figure that gave Thorfinn purpose. And Ashkelad allowed this. He kept that boy close, fed his hatred, and shaped his growth, not just as a warrior, but as a tool and a shadow of his father's strength. But beneath the cruelty, there was something deeper. Ashkelad saw potential in Thorfinn. He didn't coddle him or guide him gently, because he believed the world wouldn't do so either. His lessons were brutal, but intentional. In his own warped way, he was raising Thorfinn to survive. Even in this battle, he still pushes for the boy to learn how to master his rage, explaining the cloud that prevents him from winning as if he knows the fates call for his end soon. Their duels always end the same as long as Thorfinn clings to their relationship. In their final clash, the truth is exposed. This was never just about vengeance. It was about being seen, about earning acknowledgement from the man who defined him. Deep down, Thorfinn loses because he hesitates to kill Ashkelad, unlike the warrior he's shown himself to be against foes like Thorkel. Because here there is emotional recognition at stake. He wants to be understood by him. Their duel is a revelation that hate can be as binding as love. That sons don't always become their fathers, but sometimes become trapped chasing them. Even the most poisonous relationships can leave behind a longing for something more, something that Thorfinn is forced to grasp with the death of his mentor, and his source of vengeance no longer being of this earth. In a series of events, Ashkelad was walked into a corner by King Sweyn, forcing his hand in killing the man if he was to ensure the safety of Wales. His devotion is rooted not in blood or identity, but in his deep love for his mother, and the name he holds sacred above all bestowed upon him, because it is the one she gave him. Lucius Artorius Castus, the man of legend, a fable his mother would often recite to him. The true king of Britannia said to return to Wales and save their people from barbaric invasions. To the Vikings, he is Ashkelad, the cunning mercenary, a man who manipulates, betrays, and kills with icy precision, and he earned the respect and loyalty through those cruel acts. But behind that persona lies the true man he is, a guardian of a dying legacy. Wales is the last remnant of Rome, of his mother's dreams, of a noble past untouched by the savagery of Norse conquest. In naming him Lucius, his mother planted the seed of a greater destiny, one rooted in honor, civilization, and sacrifice. Though born of a cruel Norse father, Ashkelad never embraced the Viking way of life. He learned to survive within it, yes, but only to shield the one place he believed was worth saving. Wales is his Rome, his reason for enduring the filth of a world driven by bloodlust and greed. Every betrayal he commits, every war he feeds, is part of a greater calculation, a ruthless strategy to protect his people and preserve a culture the world is trying to erase. Where the Vikings see power as an end in itself, Ashkelad sees it as a tool, one he wields not for himself, like we at first assumed, but for his higher calling. The name Lucius Artorius Castus is a reminder of the man he aspires to be, and the civilization he refuses to let die. In the end, Ashkelad is a paradox, a Viking who loathes Norsemen, a liar who serves truth, a villain who shoulders the burden of a fading world. And through it all, his heart remains in the green hills of Wales, the one place he has never betrayed. By killing the king here today, he seals a path for Canute to seize the throne, allowing for the prince to fulfill his hopes to protect the sovereign Wales, and protect it Canute will do out of respect for the man's sacrifice, for his own plans for the future of Northern Europe. Lucius may not see the fruits of his actions here today, but he has an idea on how the story may end. That is, at least, for his people. As for the boy obsessed with his continued existence, that story is much more complicated. When Thorfinn steps into the hall and sees Ashgalad's lifeless body, time seems to freeze. For years his existence has been tethered to this crook, and now, without warning, his death the boy claimed to desire has been fulfilled. Yet it was not by Thorfinn's hand, not from the duels he longed for, but through a death that denied him the only closure he had ever chased. Though cut from different cloth, Ashgalad and Thor's deaths mirror each other in a haunting way. Both surrendered their lives not out of fear or defeat, but to serve causes greater than themselves. Ashgalad, by contrast, died in a cunning sacrifice, weaponizing chaos in a final act of control. His sacrifice was not peaceful like Thor's, but explosive, a calculated disruption that cleared the path for Canute to seize power and for Wales to survive in the shadow of an empire. It was the last move of a man who lived in the shadows, pulling strings. But in death, he made his clearest, loudest statement. Both men, despite their sins and contradictions, died with purpose. They rejected the shallow glory of Viking conquest, and in their final breaths, showed that a man's true worth lies not in how many he kills, but in what he's willing to die for. Yet none of that is understood by Thorfinn. The boy who once vowed vengeance is suddenly a man with no target. The sword in his hand becomes meaningless, his years of sacrifice void. He does not cry out of grief for a loved one, but out of the unbearable weight of a life built on revenge collapsing in on itself. Who is he without the enemy he shaped his soul around? It is the cruelest irony. Ashgalad, the man who taught him everything through pain and distance, dies not as a villain, but as a patriot to his country and his cause, revealing a depth in his character Thorfinn never fully understood. And with that realization comes a shattering silence in his head. No longer occupied with thoughts of hate to blur the sins he's committed, the trauma catches him. Thorfinn was never a warrior, only described as one by the knives in his hands and the lives he claimed. He has always been a boy lost in war, but now the war begins within himself. The rage is gone, the purpose is missing. All that remains is the echo of a life wasted, taking the life of others, chasing a ghost, and following a master of puppets. This prologue outlines the death of the sword, a brutal tale of vengeance, identity, and the cost of living by the blade. It's a story built on the illusion that meaning comes through violence, yet in its final moments the mirage clears. Thor's is gone, Ashgalad too, and Thorfinn, the vengeful spirit, is left with nothing but the broken pieces of identity. Yet where one saga ends, another begins. What lies next for the boy is not war, but what follows when the sword is finally lowered, when a life driven by hatred comes to a halt and is forced to reckon with what it has become. It is in the stillness of a farm, far from the roar of battle that numbs the mind to one's actions, that Vinland Saga becomes something even more profound, a story not of killing, but of healing, of redemption, of slavery, of forgiveness, of the long painful road to become more than what the world tried to make you. Thorfinn's next chapter is not a retreat from violence. It is the confrontation of it in full, not with fist, but with reflection, with moral clarity, with the courage to change. And so the journey of the boy who was once a slave to rage continues, no longer towards vengeance, but towards freedom, freedom from new chains that bind him. He begins to yearn for a world of kindness, to bring sanctuary to lost boys like his childhood self, a land without slaves, without war, a place he remembers described to him long ago by his father, a place named Vinland. And though it feels a myth, he holds on to its memory, a spark of new purpose and identity, dormant in his dreams, one that will take a brother not of blood, but of friendship, to awaken within him. A fir on a barren land withers with neither bark nor leaves. So too does the man loved by none. Why should he live a long life? This question rings out throughout the forthcoming events. Thorfinn has become a man hollow and without purpose. The connections in life he once had severed or distant. The northern Brit Einar has lost his father, his farm twice, and most recently his mother and sister murdered before his eyes. He has nothing to be loved by, sold into slavery by the Vikings that pillaged his land and killed his family. He He's left without a clear reason to continue through life. Is survival enough? If no one mourns you, remembers you fondly, or holds you dear, does your life matter? The statement doesn't just lament lovelessness. It questions whether existence without being loved is any existence at all. In an age where many live and die by the sword, the quote acts as a wake-up call. What is the value of strength, of power, of legacy, if there is no one to remember you fondly? These two opposing characters, both stripped bare of purpose but from different worlds, may just find in one another a reason to continue forward. A reason to live a long life. For purpose is found through continued existence, even when the road begins to crumble and the fog clouds the path in front of us. You only need to follow the light of another's lantern. Einar enters Thorfinn's life as the first true connection to someone who does not live by the blade. He too is a man who has lost everything, his family, his freedom, his home. Yet unlike Thorfinn, he still chooses to live with dignity, not rage. Where Thorfinn is numb, Einar is raw. Where Thorfinn is silent, Einar speaks the truth. And in that honesty, something stirs. Einar doesn't try to change Thorfinn. He simply sees him as a fellow human being. It's that unspoken kindness, that quiet refusal to treat him as anything less, that becomes the catalyst for Thorfinn's awakening. Where Thorfinn puts up with mistreatment, Einar speaks out. Where he gives in, Einar pushes them past their limits. Through his co-worker, Thorfinn is forced to feel again guilt, grief, and eventually hope. Because there is hope for them despite their enslavement. The head of the farm estate and their master, Ketil, presents himself as a kind master, a man who believes in treating his slaves with dignity so long as they work hard and stay obedient. It's a contrast to the brutality seen elsewhere, so his farm seems like a haven, a luxury and blessing for those who find themselves bought and brought to this place. But the truth is more complicated, because there is no such thing as a kind slave master. Benevolence built on ownership is still control. Mercy used to justify possession is still dehumanization. Ketil's self-image as a gentle patriarch blinds him to the system he upholds and actively contributes to. His kindness isn't selfless, as we will inevitably see. It's a tool to preserve the comfort he's built, to ease his guilt and exploitation, to convince himself that he's different from the other slave owners. He's better. He's worthy of the wealth that surrounds him. But slavery with a smile is still slavery. Though Einar and Thorfinn, through hard work of creating new land for farming, can attain their freedom, at the end of the day, they are still chained workers forced into labor, with a key to their shackles jangled before their eyes. Yet while Ketil may be rather kind, the other workers and retainers among the farm are not above dehumanizing slaves. The master's son, Olmar, is introduced as the worst kind of child born into power. Arrogant, insecure, and desperate to prove he's worthy of the Norse blood in his veins that call him to battle for honor. He romanticizes war, idolizes strength, and clings to the image of the warrior, despite being clearly unfit for it in body and spirit. His bluster is loud, but underneath it lies a fragile boy terrified of insignificance. Olmar doesn't want to fight because he believes in valor. He just wants to matter on his own terms, not because of his father's riches. And in a society that value can only be seized through bloodshed, he thinks violence is the only path to worth. His story is one of confusion, a naive product of a culture that worships the sword and mocks compassion. Into the farm mercenary force that provides protection, hype him up to become a man. A path they say is found only through killing. And what better target for your first kill than slaughtering the equivalent of human livestock? Einar and Thorfinn find themselves dragged from their work to the fortress, put in front of the frightened boy, who the soldiers whisper in the ear of to kill, but he is incapable. His sword quakes, and tears build in his eyes. This boy is no killer. Before the guests, Thorfinn steps forward, asking for them to allow Einar to leave, to kill him and only him, which creates confusion. The mercs desired entertainment, some blood spilled while some slaves scream in fear. Yet before them only the master's son quivers, and the slave, well, he stands in the face of death unwavering, for they know not of what he has seen. Fox becomes angered by Thorfinn's lack of fear, testing him with shallow strikes to the body, attempting to make his stoicism crack. But he fights against the tide. Thorfinn's refusal to defend himself isn't cowardice, it's conviction. Each swing of the blade carves into flesh, but not once does Thorfinn raise a hand. He refuses to acknowledge Fox's use of violence altogether. The boy who had once lived by the blade now offers no resistance, no anger, nor even fear. He no longer has anything to protect, not even his life, which died alongside his purpose found in Ashkelon. As Fox becomes further enraged at Thorfinn's resolve, the boy poses a question to the warriors now gathered around them in a ring, silently in awe. Why do we fear death? Are we living because we're afraid to die? Does anything good come from being alive? Not for me. In all the days I've lived, not one good thing has happened. We're left staring into the hollow soul of a boy who has given up on all. Empty and devoid of anger, of love, and of direction. But in emptiness there is endless potential, endless possibility. He just does not realize this just yet. But the leader of the mercenaries, Heavy, reintroduces that spark of life back to Thorfinn as he interrupts this stupid game of chicken, striking at Thorfinn, awakening his dormant instincts. For all his declarations that life holds no meaning, that nothing good has ever happened, and that he does not fear death, his body betrays his words. It moves. It wants to survive, revealing that some part of Thorfinn, even if subconscious, still values life, still hopes. In a world where he's spent years convincing himself he has nothing left, this single dodge becomes profound. It signifies that his journey isn't over, that beyond the despair, beyond the guilt, there's still a part of him that wants to keep going. This moment sparks a curiosity in Einar about his friend. While very quiet and dread-stricken, nothing like a warrior, the boy has incredible skills and fortitude, scars that mark the battles he's likely seen. He begins to wonder about Thorfinn's past, about what made him into what he is, and the boy does not hold back the truth. Each night, Thorfinn screams out as he's dragged through a grotesque parade of the men he's killed, their blood staining his hands in the afterlife of his guilt. These are not fantasies of violence or punishment from some divine force. They are his own soul reckoning with the past he tried to forget by burying it in his silence. In these visions, he is not a warrior. He's a lost child surrounded by the corpses of his victims, unable to speak, unable to atone. The screams in his sleep show us the layer beneath the silence of his waking moments. His body may be enslaved to the farm, but his mind is chained to something far worse. The endless weight of his own sins. These nightmares are the soul's protest against emptiness. They are proof that he cannot run from what he's done. And yet, they are also the soil from which rebirth can grow. Because only when he truly sees what he was, can he begin to become something else. Einar's conversation with Thorfinn of his past becomes a spark, while laying out the entire truth that he had killed both innocents and other warriors. He makes no excuse. For there is no excuse good enough to rationalize taking away life. He knows this, and he's tormented by the fact he knows not the number of lives he's ended. The bond these two have built through sweat, silence, and shared suffering now stands at a crossroad. Einar, who has lost everything to raiders like Thorfinn once was, is forced to confront a brutal truth. His friend was the kind of monster who destroyed his life. That night, unable to contain the fury and grief swelling within him, Einar quietly moves to strangle Thorfinn in his sleep, but he stops. And that pause changes everything, because Einar sees him, a man already strangled by his own guilt, a shell who wakes screaming from nightmares of the dead he can never bring back. Thorfinn isn't a warrior proud of the corpses that line his consciousness. He's a broken boy still bleeding from wounds no sword could inflict. This moment of hesitation is not mercy. It's a recognition of humanity. In choosing not to kill Thorfinn, Einar chooses to believe that people can change, that humans are not born evil, that deep down, all man is good. They may just not acknowledge it. Or maybe they've become so deep in a pool of crimson that they don't even consider their own humanity. The friendship between two broken souls, once rooted in shared labor, transforms into something deeper, becomes a bond forged through pain and truth, and the choice not to perpetuate the cycle of hatred. Einar counters his friend's early nihilistic statement that nothing good has ever happened to him with the idea that your existence is proof that once someone showed you mercy. Einar, who had suffered a path just as harsh as Thorfinn's, still sees value in life. He doesn't deny the pain, but he acknowledges the small mercies that allowed him to keep breathing. For him now, it's the bond he has built with Thorfinn, in the few conversations he has had with the house slave Arnheid by the well each morning. In the case of Thorfinn, the fact he wasn't killed in battle or executed as a criminal or left to starve means someone, an enemy who missed, a farmer who fed him, a commander who spared him, chose to let him live. Einar's point is that even in a world soaked in violence, goodness can still echo forward in subtle ways. And maybe, just maybe, Thorfinn being alive isn't meaningless. Maybe it's because someone chose to show him grace, and now he has a chance to do something with that grace. This awakens something in the distraught boy. The kindness shown to him, Einar's faith that Thorfinn can and has changed from the killer he was, gives him hope in himself, that he, and anyone else who feels they have done evil, can actively choose to seed back good into this world. He's not just the sum of his sins, but also the product of mercy, of others' choices not to destroy him. And now he can choose to become someone who carries that mercy forward, pays back the world for the life it's given him. And so he finds new beauty in life, taking greater interest in their work farming, in the invention of tools not for war, but for cultivating, in the relationships with the people around them, Arnheid, Hebi, and even the old master, Ketil's father, who seems uneasy of his son's way of building an empire out of crops. The old master looks over the vast fields his son now holds, but where Ketil sees prosperity, he sees an inevitable fall of a house of cards. The farm, once a modest stretch of land tended by its owner's own hands, has grown into something bloated, too large for any one man to truly own, too wide for a single soul to walk and know. He doesn't voice his concerns in anger, but in a weary observation. To him, this expansion isn't progress, it's a slow descent into rot of spirit. When a man builds beyond what he needs, when he begins to hunger for more than his hands can sow, he stops seeing people as people. Workers become tools. Even retainers with the insurmountable debts they owe to Ketil for borrowed land are slaves of another nature. Morality becomes something sacrificed in the name of growth, even if Ketil attempts to ease the burden of ownership of humans in his mind. In the eyes of the old master, Ketil's ambition is more than a misstep. It's a betrayal of what farming is meant to be, a place of balance, not excess. The old master believes wisdom and happiness is found in living with just enough, not in stretching one's grasp until the whole structure buckles under the weight of greed. He fears what his son is building is a tower of sand, grand but doomed to fall. It's through talks like these, with the power now a part of his life, Thorfinn begins to build a new self and identity. The old master had once told him that it's good he's found himself empty after his source of hate was destroyed, because an empty person can fill themselves with anything. He can be reborn in his own image, and with the processing of his grief, Thorfinn is finally ready to confront his nightmares. In his dreams, he's confronted by the mountain of corpses, victims of his own sword, pulling him down towards the hollowed earth, screams of agony escaping from their alien forms. He's forced to face the truth he's tried so long to bury, that his pain does not make him unique, only another link in a chain of suffering. It's only when he sees Ashkelad, an echo of the man who shaped and destroyed him, that the path forward becomes clear. Ashkelad in death becomes a symbol of clarity. He does not coddle Thorfinn or shame him, but urges him to climb from this hell the Vikings call Valhalla, a place of endless battle, not as heavenly as often described in myth. This is the reality of the land where warriors can battle with bodies that no longer know death. Some seem to quite enjoy themselves here. But Ashkelad knows Thorfinn was never meant for down under. He is but a boy, one who now realizes his true path lies above. He must rise. Rise and choose a life beyond the sword. The corpses will not disappear. They will not forgive, and he will ensure they are not forgotten. But Thorfinn realizes now, he does not have to add to their pile. That is what his father represented in life, and now in death. Across from him, coated in an even larger number of the dead, Thors too chose to continue living. Not in search of forgiveness, for some sins there are none, but to atone through action. The weight of taking a life can never be lifted, but it can be carried forward. This is his choice, to honor the life of those lost by devoting his own to creating something good enough for them both. This is the heart of his rebirth, a vow not to run from the past, but to carry it with him as a compass. From this moment, Thorfinn's philosophy begins to take shape, one similar to his father's own. A life without violence, without enemies. A life where true strength is not found in the ability to kill, but the courage to live without hate. His path forward will be long and difficult, as not all will share his same sentiment. 3 years have gone by since Einar had been sold to the farm, and now he and Thorfinn are weeks away from their day of freedom, Ketil offering to buy their plot from them and set them free after he returns from his visit with the king. They speak of what they may do once they are no longer chained to the farm as workers, and Thorfinn speaks of his dream to create a place free from wars and slavery. Einar too wishes to contribute to Thorfinn's desired future, but his worry falls upon their other friend, who does not have the same possibilities as they do. Arnhide's story is a tragedy buried beneath the fields of labor. Once a free woman with a husband and child, her life was torn apart by Viking pillaging in the slave market. Her husband Gardar, once a gentle soul, was replaced and reshaped by the cruelty of war and of bondage, returning to rescue her from this farm not as a man she loved, but as a wild, violent shadow of who he used to be. His eyes at times are the ones she used to know, but when cornered, like a rabid dog, they quickly turn primal and bloodthirsty. Now as he claws towards freedom through blood, Arnhide finds herself imprisoned in a different way. Her master claims to care for her, but his kindness is a mask for control. She carries his child, a baby created from powerlessness instead of love. While Thorfinn and Einar dream of freedom and rebuild themselves through hope, Arnhide is denied even the possibility. Her body is not her own. Her choice is dictated by men who either want to possess her or drag her into their revenge. She is a symbol of the deepest cruelty, a person robbed of liberty and the very right to want it. She becomes torn with the choices presented to her: to help her husband, though he may have lost his mind, or to protect the baby in her belly, one that she may not have wanted, but as their mother will do what she must to protect them. Arnhide stands at the edge of an impossible decision, torn between the haunting past and a fragile, uncertain present. Staying on Ketil's farm offers the illusion of safety, a place where her baby might survive, but also means to surrender, continuing life as property, owned and pitied but never free. To flee is to gamble everything for love that may already be lost. To stay is to betray it. Trapped between two broken worlds, Arnhide is forced to weigh hope against survival and freedom against the death of her spirit. But inevitably, with the help of Thorfinn and Einar, she chooses a happy medium. They help her free the captured Gardar, who has killed many of Hebi's men, and set the two of them out away from this place of bondage. It's a risk, but it carries both a future for the two of them, alongside a future for the baby as a free child. The only difficulty is Hebi stands in the way of this happy ending. He believes in the structure of their society, of order, that gives men like him purpose. When Thorfinn and Einar try to help Gardar escape, he acts out of conviction. To him, law and order, however flawed it may be in a given nation, is what separates people from beasts. If every slave rebelled, if every rule was broken out of emotion or past injustice, then the world would collapse into chaos. He sees Gardar not as a hero or victim, but as a murderer, threatening that fragile balance in the Norse world already plagued with chaos. Even when the moral weight of Gardar's suffering is undeniable, Hebi upholds the system, because without it, he believes there's nothing left but the violence he experienced as a soldier in his youth. His philosophy is rooted in restraint and responsibility, even when it puts him at odds with men like Thorfinn, who have seen and labeled the cost of such systems as too great. Hebi is the reflection of a man who still believes order can preserve peace, even if it means standing in the way of justice. But beneath his stoic resolve lies a mind in torment, a man caught between the injustice he enforces and the helplessness he feels to change it. He knows slavery is wrong. It gnaws at him in the moments of quiet, when he looks upon the eyes of the beaten and broken. But what power does a wandering swordsman truly have? He was hired to keep order, not question the foundation of such within this farm. To rebel would be to sever the fragile threads that give his life structure, give this farm structure. It would only cast himself into a world with no place for a man of his kind. And so he compromises. He convinces himself that enforcing the rules, however cruel, is better than letting chaos reign. He tells himself he's maintaining peace, but deep down, Hebi is a man burdened by contradiction, upholding a system he doesn't believe in because he sees no alternative. His blade defends a status quo that shackles others, and his silence is not approval, but resignation. In another life, he might have stood beside Thorfinn against the injustices of the Norse world, but in this one, he clings to the only role he knows of, soldier of order, not savior of the broken. To Thorfinn, this act of silence is participation in a system of oppression, Inaction in the face of injustice is the very fuel that keeps systems of cruelty alive. He's seen firsthand the damage done by those who claimed they were just following orders. Those who looked the other way and excused their role as being too small to matter. Hebi's resignation, his belief that he has no power to change the system, is to Thorfinn a dangerous illusion. Even if one man cannot overturn the world, every man has a choice. A choice to raise his voice, to refuse to wield the sword that binds another in chains. Thorfinn believes the first step towards peace lies within small acts of defiance against the tide, acts that begin with accountability. His life is an oath to cause no harm, because he understands now, every time you choose comfort over conscience, you carve deeper the grooves of oppression. Hebi may tell himself he's keeping order, but Thorfinn sees a man afraid to accept his own potential for change, so he stands against him, unarmed with open palms. If violence is the only way to resolve this conflict, he will do so without taking life. This battle ends with Garter being mortally wounded, and Hebi unconscious, unable to prevent the couple from leaving. Thorfinn and Einar see Arnheid and Garter off, all while knowing the man's time on this earth is minimal. They allow him to live his last few moments, believing he was successful in rescuing his wife from servitude, and that their son, who's now long gone, killed while Arnheid was seized in the pillaging, is still alive. It's a long wagon ride, one with heavy emotions for Arnheid, knowing now that there awaits nothing for her on this journey forward, and only punishment back at the farm. As her husband dies, she's forced to bear the grief and the fear of what may now happen to her baby on Ketil's return. Garter dies in a reflection of his life, one tainted with regret. Once a free man, a husband, and a father, he had been pulled into the storm of Viking life, twisted into a tool for violence and the promise of spoils for his family and village. But those spoils created an opening for attack on everything he truly valued. He fought, he killed, he survived, but what he became in the process was unrecognizable, even to himself. As he lies cradled in Arnheid's arms, the blood draining from his body, he doesn't look like a warrior who chased the gates of Valhalla, because he is yet another Norseman, swept by the storm of lavishness the Viking way promised. What dies on this wagon ride is a broken man reaching back through memory, aching for a time before it all went wrong. The raids, the blood, the slavery, it only created emptiness in those final moments. Garter's silence speaks volumes. He does not celebrate the life he lived, he mourns it, and in doing so, he exposes the deep fracture at the heart of Norse society, a culture that worships violence, leaving no room for humanity. His death is a painful reminder that the path of the sword cannot be walked without leaving your soul to die. The visit to the king did not go as anticipated. Greater danger brewed beyond these fields, now rattled with the echo of Garter's rampage. Ketil was greeted in the capital not by the king he had cultivated a relationship with through elaborate gifts, but instead by his brother Canute. The ambitious prince, having been crowned king of England, came to visit his dying brother, only to find himself being gifted the crown of Denmark as well. But the king isn't the boy we once knew him as. He has become more calculated and cold, even poisoning his beloved brother to obtain the title as King of Denmark. As Canute stands over the lifeless husk of his brother, a piece of himself dies too. The boy who once trembled at the sight of blood now moves with the elegance of someone who's accepted a monstrous truth. To rule this world, one must become one with its cruelty. Inner peace does not come with the crown that propels its master forward. Instead, it brings whispers, phantoms that gnaw at the soul. Overlooking the courtyard basked in moonlight, Canute hears the voice of his dead father, King Sweyn, a phantom of his self-doubt. The severed, rotting head plays his grim advisor, urging him to abandon sentiment, to seize power with an iron fist. This is the will to the crown, a philosophy soaked in blood, and though Canute detests it, he obeys it. Because in a world shaped by swords and conquest, there is no room for softness, not if he is to shape something better from its ruins. With every calculated step, he buries his former self deeper, wearing the mask of a king who sacrifices his heart so others might one day live in peace. But the cost is clear. Canute is no longer walking beside his ideals. He is dragging them behind him, hoping they can still follow down this road caked in the blood of innocent and sinful alike. The day Kettle sets foot in his throne room is the very moment Canute sets his sights on his next conquest, marking a turning point for the man he'll become. As king of both England and Denmark, Canute found himself responsible for maintaining a massive army stationed across the newly occupied England, a force that required constant pay to stay loyal and functional. Without the financial support of Denmark's nobility or a structured taxation system capable of funding such a force, Canute turned to the most immediate and profitable solution, confiscating prosperous estates. Given the ease it would be to take advantage of Kettle's dumb children, Almar too arrogant and thirsty to prove himself, and his older brother Thorgil, arrogant in his own ways, thirsting for the glory he finds in Viking life, they can easily create an opportunity to back their takeover. By seizing it under the pretense of justice, which becomes possible after the killing of several Canute's men in a carefully cultivated environment created to cause Almar to lose himself in rage. Canute could not only eliminate a potential threat to his central authority, but also redirect its wealth to feed and pay his troops abroad. It was a political maneuver, disguised as law, a king's version of pragmaticism. To maintain peace in one nation, he had to extract the wealth from within another. It reflects the shift in Canute's character, the boy who once prayed for peace, now fully embracing the machinery of the empire, believing that cruelty, if enacted for the greater good, was not just necessary, but also righteous. This move would cause resentment from a particular farmer, not quite keen on the idea of forking over his domain. It leaves a man who once had everything with nothing, and in fear of losing the world he created on the farm. Kettle pays the sailor Leif, who still after decades looks for Thorfinn, to smuggle him and his family back to the farm so they may prepare for the war against the king. Leif only takes them up on the opportunity so that he may finally reunite with Thorfinn and fulfill his long-standing promise to his father to bring his son back to Iceland. The only issue is, there's not much for Kettle to come back to. He had built himself up beneath a lie that he was a retired Viking, the Iron Fist, but the ownership of that title was a rumor he let circulate as it benefited in making him seem more like a man of leadership and bravery, when the truth is he's a coward afraid of losing his life of riches and comfort. The only one he shares his true self with is Arnheid. He places his faith and his love in this slave, a woman he owns and declares is his property, not seeing her as an individual person with rights, but his woman. Yet Kettle's relationship with Arnheid is a portrait of delusion disguised as affection, love warped by power, ownership, and undressed trauma. From his perspective, he genuinely believes he loves her. She's kind, gentle, and nurturing in ways that soothe his ego and fragile sense of masculinity. But the love he offers has no respect for her autonomy. It's conditional, rooted in the fantasy that she belongs to him, that her warmth validates him as a good man. This need stems from Kettle's deep insecurity. He has long felt inadequate from posing as a fearsome warrior despite never truly earning that title, desperate to be seen more than a wealthy landowner who inherited status from a lie. His father's disappointment and wisdom linger in the background, a voice he spent his life ignoring. In Arnheid, he finds a chance to rewrite that narrative, to be admired, to be chosen. But Arnheid never chose him. She was bought, trapped, and forced to play the role of a partner to please her master. This dynamic becomes even more toxic when Kettle returns to find she has attempted to flee with her old husband, resulting in the glass floor that held his fantasy life with her to shatter and leave him all the more alone. His farm is under threat of seizure. The woman he loves attempted to flee with her true love, so as he approaches the stall where she lies shackled, her attempts to maintain peace only feed his desperation, making him feel all the more betrayed by the very person he clings to for emotional survival. What he calls love really is a projection of his longing to feel powerful and needed, and in that, he fails to see the woman in front of him as anything more than his property. To Kettle, Arnheid is a slave for wounds he refuses to treat, and so onto her he inflicts rage, refusing to listen to her pleas to not kick her belly for the baby may die. She is beaten and beaten until her cries fall silent and her movements become still. In a rare moment of moral clarity, Hebby steps between Kettle and Arnheid, halting the brutal beating with a quiet but firm presence. Though a mercenary who follows the orders of his payer, this act reveals the flicker of a conscience buried beneath this soldier's detachment. Arnheid, already broken and defenseless, becomes a mirror that reflects the ugliness of the broken weasel's unraveling. Yet it's too late for Kettle to realize what he's done. The girl lies barely clutching to life. Hebby, perhaps unable to undo the world's injustice, chose in this instant to draw a line, not out of heroism, but because some things simply can't be ignored. This was his line. Yet still, even after witnessing Kettle beat Arnheid to near death, he doesn't walk away from his duty. When war arrives at the farm's doorstep, he arms himself without hesitation, saying it's his obligation, as the farm's hired protector, to fight. But his reasoning rings hollow. It isn't loyalty, at least not really. For Kettle is a liar and a trickster. Hebby was taught the way of the blade by the true Iron Fist Kettle, and had come to this farm in a time of desperation in his life, only to find this fraud instead. So why does he feel he must fight in a feudal war against the strongest forces of Denmark for someone who used the title of a warrior to obtain recognition? Hebby is a man who traded freedom of thought for the comfort of duty, who follows orders because questioning them would mean questioning himself. There are no chains on Hebby's wrist, but he is shackled all the same, by a code that demands obedience, by a role that keeps him from stepping off the path. He belongs to a more nuanced kind of slavery, the kind built not from force, but from belief in a structure of order that fails its beholders. Had their actions led to the state Arnheid now lies in, barely clutching to life, death almost a certainty at this point? Thorfinn wonders if things may have turned out differently had he not resorted to violence against Hebby to secure Gardar's escape. His inner conflict on this matter is a powerful reflection of his philosophical evolution. For so long, violence was his only language, his way of surviving, expressing, even existing. But now, standing in the midst of his newfound ideology, every action he takes is measured against the belief that there exist peaceful resolutions. When he wonders if he was wrong to raise his fist against Hebby instead of trying harder to speak, it's growth from the boy he once was, into the man he is now destined to become. Was the fight necessary to begin with? Or was that his old ways coming out to the surface? In Hebby, he saw a man bound by his own warped sense of duty. A man who wasn't evil, just trapped. And in striking him down, Thorfinn fears he may have repeated the very cycle he wants to break, meeting stubbornness with force instead of understanding. This doubt in his actions is a necessary weight he's learning to carry. The path of peace is about striving to choose a better way, even when it presents itself as harder, especially when it's harder. And so he wonders, as the farm peasants who scream for blood in the honor of killing their enemies that will march against them, if there is anything he can do to stop this massacre that will soon begin. The people of Kettle's leagues are no match for the elite Huon Vikings backed by Knut's royal guard, but their first priority falls on Arnheid and getting her out before hell breaks loose amongst this once thriving grassland. It's one-sided. Exactly what Knut had feared. He had attempted to get a conditional surrender from the farm master, but Kettle ignored his calls to hand over his land and be spared, desperately clinging to his power and wealth. But he pays for this greed in blood. Dozens of workers are brutally slaughtered, others mutilated. Even if by some miracle his forces were to repel Knut's invasion, what remains? His fields burned, his people dead, his name stained in blood. The truth is, he has already lost, far before the first arrows launched. There's no victory in a war fought to protect illusions of power. The farm he once built to secure peace and prosperity becomes the stage for senseless destruction. In choosing battle over surrender, Kettle ensures that even survival comes at the cost of everything that made his life worth living. It's a sobering reflection of a man clinging to control in a world that has already moved past him. He is insignificant and gets cleaved down by a Yorm Viking as such. Knut's General Wolf calls off the advancement, the king also demanding no pillaging takes place, something he has since his rise to power discouraged among the soldiers who see it as their right given Norse norms. Hebby, having seen Kettle go down after taking an axe to the helmet, slithers away with the unconscious fraud, stumbling upon Thorfinn and Einar, who surround a wagon. As he approaches, he's surprised they have yet to leave the farm, but then he realizes why they no longer move. In the wagon lies the deceased Arnheid, having died from her injuries her so-called lover had given her. Arnheid's death is a devastating reminder that the world they live in is still ruled by cruelty, injustice, and loss, no matter how hard they try to change it. For Einar, it shatters the fragile hope he had begun to build, reopening wounds of helplessness he thought had started to heal. For Thorfinn, It's another soul lost to the cycle of violence he once fed and now seeks to end. Her final moments speak volumes about the brutality of slavery and the cost of survival in a world that doesn't let the gentle dream. Her death marks a turning point. It solidifies the conviction in both men to forge a future where no one else has to suffer in chains, where the kindness Arnheid showed the two of them, all while in a place built on power and fear, won't be forgotten. She becomes part of the reason they keep moving forward, not in vengeance, but in defiance, and building something better in the world they currently know. They bury her near the ocean hills, overlooking the waters that may one day lead to a place of peace and belonging, a place Thorfinn hopes can show humanity is not yet lost, a land his father spoke of, the land of Vinland. He knows if he is to create a place free of slavery and war, today he must make that evident. And so he does the unexpected. He goes to confront the man who sold him into slavery, the man who stands for the prosperity of the many at the sacrifice of the few. He will convince the king to stop this pointless violence, all without raising his own fist. Thorfinn, son of Thors, has found his own path to become a true warrior. The circle of warriors stood in silence, watching blow after blow land against the face of a man who would not lift a finger in return. Thorfinn, once a name soaked in vengeance and blood, now stood unmoving, fist unclenched, eyes steady. With each strike he absorbed, he wasn't proving strength in the way the Norse understood it, but showing the idea at its most raw level. They expected defiance through violence. What they received was a man who defied violence itself. He wagered he could take 100 blows from the bear killer draught. Believing the small man incapable, they laughed it off, entertained to see him try. Yet now, the chanting and laughter ceased as they approached the 90s, and Thorfinn remained standing. And choosing to take 100 punches rather than fight for his audience, Thorfinn cast aside everything the Viking world revered. Glory through blood, power through force. He wanted no part in it. But even in his rejection, he awoke something primal in the men watching. They saw this act of non-violence wasn't a form of cowardice. This was the kind of strength they couldn't name. The kind Thorkill once glimpsed in Thor's. The strength to walk away from the sword and still stand taller than any man who wields one. Thorfinn isn't defying the path of a warrior. He's repaved what these men saw it as. He became something greater in their eyes, a man of righteousness. And in that, he forced them to reckon with a terrifying thought. Perhaps true strength lies not in conquering others, but in conquering oneself. Olmar caught glimpses of the man's determination to bring an end to this war by his own means. He had come as the acting head of the house after his father lies incapacitated, deciding against his brother's calls for more blood, more violence, and choosing to surrender to the king's will. He was distraught after killing for the first time, learning he hated violence and hated what it brought upon people, and so he had walked his own path to manhood. By committing his own sins, he realized what it meant to truly have courage. It lied not in the arrogance his brother claimed was courage, the willingness to die and be killed for a fictitious idea of honor. He saw a true warrior's heart standing against the Vikings now, choosing to take the path of most resistance, and in doing so, upon receiving the 100th blow, proved to men who only respect violence that he stood above them. He became something untouchable, something idealized, and was given the deepest of respects possible for Vikings, the approval of even Wolf to see the king. Canute could not refuse, given the entire troop was requesting for the king to give audience to this warrior, and so alongside his brother Einar, Thorfinn confronted Canute, not in dismissal of his ideologies and ways, but in hopes of understanding one another, of finding resolution in diplomacy. Their conversation becomes a clash of two evolved ideologies forged by suffering and shaped by power over the self, one rooted in control, the other in peace. Canute has come to believe that the only way to create a peaceful world is through force, sacrifice, and dominion. He bears the crown as a curse, convincing himself that seizing land, wealth, and authority, even through bloodshed, is a necessary burden for the sake of future peace. In contrast, Thorfinn rejects the cycle entirely. He believes peace cannot be built atop corpses. To him, true strength is the ability to endure, to rebuild, and to reject the sword, no matter how justified its use may seem. Their exchange is not about who is right. It's about two broken men choosing different roads in response to the same pain. One bears the world to end its violence. The other walks away from it to plant something new, beyond the reaches of the cruel world that's been cultivated in Europe. Thorfinn's idealized land of Vinland becomes a place for those rejected and deserted by Knut's utilitarianism. And the decision to not retaliate with might, but with the creation of something new, is what changes Knut's mindset. Thorfinn's change from this bloody rage monster to this peaceful leader shows Knut the beauty beneath the beast that is the Vikings. Gives the king hope that in the people he assumed were a lost cause, there is still something of value. Knut leads them out of necessity, for someone must control the beast to keep them in line and unite them, otherwise hell may break loose amongst the Danish tribes, leading to even more killing than what's current. Sweyn's head reinforced his inner fears, that he was no better than his father, and that he must continue the union of Denmark for the sake of directing when and where killing and pillaging could be tolerated, things he only allowed out of the need to control the beast. But Thorfinn challenges him to be better. The man acknowledges Knut's ways, stating he's in no position to claim whether they are good or bad. It's a matter of fact many prosper while the few suffer under his leadership. Yet personally, he could not accept this world, which is why he'll make his own. This presents Knut with an undeniable challenge. It isn't a rebellion or a plea. It's a man choosing to walk away from the world he attempts to create. For Knut, it was justified every harsh choice under the banner of making a better world through power. Thorfinn's path offers a contrast. Here is someone building peace not with crowns or bloodshed, but with his own two hands. And seeing Thorfinn commit to that vision, Knut is forced to confront the hollowness in his own conquest. What good is power if it only creates more resentment, more dead sons, brothers, friends? Thorfinn's defiance through peace reminds Knut that true strength may not come from ruling over others, but from choosing not to. And so for the first time the king steps back, not out of weakness, but perhaps the first flicker of wisdom, unclouded by the will of the crown. In that moment of moral clarity, the ghost of his father fades, not because Knut has eradicated all darkness from his heart, but because he's no longer a slave to it. The haunting disappears because Knut has made a choice that is truly his own. He drops the plan to seize farms, solving the problem with financing the troops in England by pulling them out from occupation. This act is taken as trust from their new king, and so unrest resolves itself across England, the people happy with the king's trust. As for the farm, it begins to rebuild under the leadership of Olmar, a changed man who remarks to Thorfinn that he hopes to one day be a tenth of the man he is. Hebby shares with them before their departure his true name. In revealing it, he offers something deeply human, vulnerability and a new reflection of himself. It's a subtle way of laying down the sword without literally doing so, dropping his soldier title of Snake, a cold-blooded animal that slithers through grasslands stalking its next prey. This is his acknowledgement of Thorfinn and Einar as the kind of people who have earned the right to know him, not just the role he played. It's an act of trust and a farewell to the violent life he's lived. For Thorfinn and Einar, it's confirmation of what their journey has sparked in others, a feeling that redemption is possible, that men shaped by war can still reclaim pieces of their soul. In a world so used to names being titles of power or fear, the giving of a true name becomes a spark of peace, both externally and of within. The farm is in the hands of good people. They can leave knowing it will become a fine resting place for their friend Arnheid, but they cannot stay to watch what it will become. The two of them have a calling to answer. What began as a path forged through blood and sorrow now bends towards hope. They carry with them no treasure, no armies, no power, only the dream to build a land where no one is owned, where no one kills, and where peace is not bought through dominance, but nurtured through empathy. This is the birth of what Vinland truly is, not just a place, but a promise. A land where the sins of the past do not dictate the worth of a man, and where, for the first time, two friends who once walked among the ashes of war walk towards a future of freedom in memory of a friend who was too tired from her harsh life to continue living. This is only the beginning of the Vinland Saga, yet its message to us rings out stronger than ever as we await the next chapter of their adventure. The saga's first two arcs chart the fall and rise of a soul. They expose a world where power is mistaken for purpose, and where survival often means surrendering one's humanity. Through Thorfinn's journey from vengeance-driven warrior to a man who chose pacifism not out of weakness, but as an act of defiance. The story reframes what it means to be strong, and in that transformation lies the truth. The cycle of violence is not broken by swords, but by the will to break away from everything swords represent. Today, while it's often more sanitized, the same mentality drives everything from gang violence to geopolitics. Nations retaliate, wars escalate, and innocent people suffer. It's just dressed in suits and drones instead of furs and axes. It makes me think, if ignorance is the root of all this pain, the lack of understanding both by choice and by ineptness, then maybe the ultimate good isn't love or truth or even kindness, but awareness. The commitment to learn, to see, to understand, even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. That's the opposite of ignorance. That's the spark that undoes it. And that's what Vinland represents. Not paradise and not utopia. Just a land built by those brave enough to see the world as it is and still believe it can be better. You, I, the people of this world are the only ones capable of believing mankind can make something more than cruelty. Together through understanding, through tolerance, through hope and hardship. I choose to believe the world can once more see the sanctuary Vinland once represented.